This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 184 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. While we are all stuck at home not travelling during the coronavirus pandemic, I thought a good bit of daydreaming wouldn't go astray, and so today's episode is all about travels to Antarctica. Not many people get to go there. I still haven't been there, and I really hope to get there someday. But fortunately, I know a few people who have, and I thought it's a great idea to have a chat with them and find out about what it's like to visit this completely magical place. So in today's episode of Antarctic Travels, I speak to three people who have, in the last few years, been on various kinds of adventures down in Antarctica. And let me tell you that I can clearly say, after speaking to all of them, that my desire to go has never been stronger, apart from a little bit about some of the treacherous seas on the way down there. That's the only bit that would put me off, but it won't put me off. One day I'll get there. Anyway, our first guest is Suzanne Moore. Now, Suzy and her husband went to Antarctica recently-ish to do something pretty cool to celebrate their 40th birthdays. I think that's a pretty cool thing to do. For my 40th birthday, I launched a podcast, so created myself all this work to do. Also fun, don't worry. But Suzy and her husband went to Antarctica. Cool idea. Too late for me, maybe 50. But anyway, Suzy is a writer and also a keen photographer, but also a former vet, so she was really into the wildlife of Antarctica. And she certainly had an amazing, incredible experience, and she told me a bit about it.
The landscape is what I'm always seeking when I'm travelling. Mm-hmm. And so to go somewhere where there is no trace of people, or almost no trace of people, and to see what the world is like when it's just left to its own devices and we're not interfering, changing, reshaping, I'm not a religious person, but it was quite an emotional sort of spiritual experience, seeing that first iceberg coming up from the boat and seeing the peninsula for the first time and just sweeping mountains with snow blowing off them, and seals and penguins and whales and albatross, and just feeling how big the world is and how, as a person, you focus so much on yourself when you're out in the world. To put your own life into perspective in relation to this amazing planet was unbelievably special.
I can imagine there's really no place quite like that. That Antarctica is really, a step above all of the other possibilities, a way to really see yourself as this tiny speck against this vast, vast landscape.
Absolutely. And, and the voyage itself was obviously a little bit challenging emotionally for me. I am not a big ocean farer.
Right.
I'm quite frightened of the ocean. I'm an okay swimmer, but I've never done swimming lessons. I'm not a beach goer. I don't, spend a lot of time in the ocean. I'm a very cling to shore kind of person. And so that kind of mindset of being able to step onto a relatively small boat, because it wasn't one of the big cruise ships, and cross the Drake's Passage, I was actually pretty terrified when we sort of set sail. And there'd been an enormous storm the day before, so a ship had to come in early, and they'd had 10-metre swells. I know. And then we got on the boat, and I'm loading myself with seasickness tablets and kind of clinging for dear life. And in the first night, we had 6 to 8 metre swells.
Oh, gosh.
As we're travelling across. Yeah, it was incredible. And, you're rolling and all the doors in the cabin are banging. And if you wanted to get up to the toilet, you couldn't just walk to the toilet. You kind of had to edge as though you were, you had a terrible hangover or a virus or something, had to claw your way across.
Wow.
It was really intense. And of course, stuff was flying in the kitchen in the morning and for those 2 days. And then you hit the peninsula and it was gone. We were past Drake's Passage and it was just flat, and it was like being on a lake.
Wow, really? Oh, gosh.
Yeah, the whole world shifted. as though you had stepped through some kind of portal. You know, you'd gone through that, run that gauntlet of the roughest passage in the world, and suddenly you kind of made it to safety on the other side. And that was really quite incredible. And everybody, you could feel that sense on the boat that everybody had when they managed to get out of their cabin.
Goodness.
Giddy sense of achievement that, you know, even though they weren't in charge of the boat, that you had actually braved this passage.
Yes, that you had psychologically conquered it, if nothing else, even if you weren't responsible for manoeuvring or anything, but you'd made it through and you were still sane.
Exactly. Yeah, it was it was unbelievable. So and I think that challenge, that sort of physical and a mental challenge of, I mean, I know you're safe on a fundamental level. You know that they're not going to let you go if it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
But you still, you know, it's still frightening. It's still terrifying when you're seeing the waves coming up higher than you on the boat, and the boat's rocking from side to side. And so I think being able to kind of get past that fear of your own safety to really experience something incredibly special on the other side makes the arrival all the better and all the more meaningful.
Yes, having a challenging journey to get there just sort of makes it that much more worthwhile, doesn't it? And so once you're there down at Antarctica, what kind of things did you get up to?
Well, we were really lucky because it was an expedition cruise, so there was only just over 100 people on the boat, which meant we were able to get out twice a day on the Zodiacs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so you're only allowed to land 100 people on shore at a time. So if you're on a larger ship, you may not get out every day, whereas we were really fortunate. So they mixed it up really well with a mixture of cruising around icebergs, looking for bird colonies and penguins and seals, popping up and down in the water, and looking at whale carcasses. And there was some shipwrecks around that they took us out to see, which were really amazing. And then we had the landings where they actually were able to take us on shore. And again, there was that sort of emotional moment, and everybody felt it. And a lot of people were kissing the ground when they got there, and it was that idea that you've touched the seventh continent.
Yes.
That not everybody gets to go everywhere. And there was a whole heap of people on the boat that were ticking off the last continent in their passports. And so they had a flag, and so you got to go and explore around, go watch the penguin colonies. I sat for hours taking photographs of penguins because they're just adorable.
Oh, aren't they? And your photos are adorable.
Well, they're impossible to resist. They're just such characters. And so we got to walk and explore, and see these incredible ice formations. And we were there very early in the season, so the landscape was still pristine. There'd only been one boat before us, so there was no touch of humanity. The penguin colonies weren't super disgusting the way they end up towards the end of the summer.
Yeah.
And, and just the proliferation of wildlife that we got to see was, you'd be happy if you had one trip where you got to see one type of whale. We got to see 3 species of whale, 5 different seals.
Wow.
2 penguin species, and just absolutely change your perspective when you come back to the density of civilization.
So I kind of feel like I don't even need to speak to anyone else. Suzy's already convinced me that this is an amazing trip, but I will, because I've got 2 more great guests. So my next guest is Paul Pichugin, who works as a photographer, and it was his photography that took him to Antarctica in 2016 with Aurora Expeditions. And he started off by telling me about the process of getting there and the Drake Passage crossing, which sounded equally scary. He mentioned how you need to strap yourself into bed, and he learnt that the hard way when he woke up midair one day. Anyway, I don't want to reiterate that too much, or I'm going to start putting people off going to Antarctica. So I'll pick up my conversation with Paul when he actually arrived there.
Once you get to Antarctica, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. So I was there to photograph and experience like the different options that they have on each trip. So I did kayaking, I did snorkelling, we camped out on the actual Antarctic continent. A lot of the cruises don't actually visit the actual main continent of Antarctica. They visit the islands surrounding it. So we did both, and then camped out overnight one night.
Wow, that's amazing.
On the continent, which was pretty incredible. They kind of wait until there's good weather, so to speak.
Right.
I think it was maybe -8 to -10 overnight that night, so not
quite
overly
mild.
cold in terms of Antarctica. And then like during the days it was hovering around zero, bit below.
Mm-hmm.
So it was if you're properly equipped, which they do give you jackets and stuff, but you want to bring your own thermals and what have you. It's actually pretty comfortable and very tolerable. And then when we were doing the kayaking, you're in a dry suit, which like I was sweating by the end of it because
right, yeah,
you're very active and it was sunny. And the kayaking is just incredible. It's so like we had a couple of days where it was just glassy, so you've just got reflections and just smooth paddling, and then you're navigating between icebergs and breaking up pancake ice, which is the ice that's just starting to form on the surface.
Right.
So you're going through that kind of stuff, and then we would also like just kayak up onto a iceberg and walk around, have a break, have some morning tea, and then get back in the kayaks and keep going.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm so jealous.
Yeah. And then the wildlife is just wonderful. Like, I'm going there as a photographer, so I was just in heaven photographing penguins and crab-eating seals and leopard seals. Leopard seals are like coming face to face with a dinosaur. Honestly, they look prehistoric.
Wow.
They can be dangerous, but you kind of give them a bit of space and you're fine.
Okay.
They're more dangerous if you're in the water snorkeling when they're around.
Right.
But they you've got dive masters looking over you and keeping you out of the water when there are leopard seals around. But the other thing we saw probably over 200 whales.
200, wow.
Yeah, for 10 days.
Oh, my gosh.
At one point, we were just actually, we were surrounded by whales, and I'd gone inside, and so I was doing some work on my laptop in the kind of dining / bar area, and they announced that there's a bunch of whales surrounding us, and might be a good time to get out on deck and take some photos. So I run out with just my snow jacket and my board shorts on, and
oh no,
some slip-on shoes. So I'm out there photographing whales, and it's snowing a bit, and
you're in board shorts.
Easily -10, and I'm in board shorts. So I got a few strange looks, and
what an Aussie!
One of the Russian guys just looked at me and he just started laughing, and we'd had a chat because my family background is Russian, and so he's like, yeah, your family's definitely from Siberia.
Yeah, but, that's true. Yeah, that makes sense.
If you're running around in shorts.
But it's all about the photos. It doesn't matter what else happens to you.
Yeah, it's not like the whales are going to wait for me to put pants on. So.
No. No, they won't. Oh, wow. That's amazing. What was the absolute highlight? What was the best moment in Antarctica?
I really think it was the kayaking. Like, I enjoyed the snorkeling, but you can only be in the water for about 40 to 45 minutes. Right. Even with your dry suit, you've got thermals, like fleecy tracksuit type pants and a hoodie, and then a dry suit over the top.
Right.
Even with all that, you've got about 40 minutes in the water before hypothermia is a very real risk.
Yeah, sure.
And so that kind of, you're constantly assessing yourself from, am I entering hypothermia yet? No, I think I'm still good.
Yeah.
But whereas the kayaking was just, you were able to relax a bit and just enjoy it. I found it, because you're at water level, everything kind of, I know you can get up a lot closer to things.
Yeah, you're really in it, aren't you? It's as you are with snorkeling, but at least you don't have that disadvantage of getting so cold. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I like the cold, but, I still, obviously hypothermia is still a risk.
Yeah.
But, we also jumped off the ship. I did what they call the polar plunge.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, so I jumped in and just my boardies, and that was, I mean, it felt cold, obviously. The water's at about -2, but it was quite refreshing as well and nice. But yeah, you're not in the water for more than like 15 to 30 seconds.
Yes. I think I would be practically walking on water to get out of there by that stage.
Yeah, quite a few people were. Apparently they're amazed. Like, there were a few comments like, you jumped in and then you just kind of floated around for a while. Everyone else is just like in and then out.
Yeah.
I think I have a bit more thermal insulation than most of the other guests. So.
And Siberian jeans.
Yeah, well, that too.
So, again, Antarctica sounds amazing. I definitely want to go kayaking there someday. I'm not convinced about the polar plunge, but perhaps, I don't know, I'm terrible even at getting in a relatively warm swimming pool during an Australian summer, but we'll see. Now, my final guest today is Carolyn Beasley. Carolyn actually got to Antarctica really recently. Unfortunately, actually recently enough that while they were down there, coronavirus kind of started getting crazy. And when they returned, they got stuck off the coast of South America for a while. But that is a story for another day, which I will tell you, or Carolyn will tell you, in another episode in the future. But for today, it's all the good stuff. And I asked Carolyn to tell me all about the highlights of her Antarctic trip.
I went on a very beautiful new ship, which was called the Roald Amundsen. It's the newest ship by the cruise company Hurtigruten. So I was on probably, I think, the third expedition that this boat's been on to Antarctica. So cool. It's a fancy new boat because it incorporates hybrid technology. So that's aimed at reducing carbon emissions, and the batteries that it has on board reduces emissions by about 20%. Awesome. And they've got quite a lot of other sort of green features. Like, a cruise ship's never going to be as green as staying at home would be, but
nothing is.
Yeah. I guess if people are going to Antarctica, that's an option for them to choose. But for me, one of the highlights of the trip was the kayaking. So it was an optional sign up, and they put us into small groups because they can only manage us. I think there was about 12 of us in the group with 2 guides, and you go out in double kayaks, and the conditions have got to be just right. So if it's rough, they don't take you. So we were kind of not sure if we were going to get to go or not. And when we did get to go, it was just so beautiful because where my group went kayaking was what they called an iceberg graveyard. So the icebergs had washed into this little bay at a place called Port Charcot. And you could just get such a good feel for the size of the things because they come in and they just get grounded and then they stop moving in this shallow water. So, it was really incredible. We couldn't go too close just in case they tipped over, but it was just amazing to be sort of dwarfed by them. And the other thing that we loved about that experience was the wildlife. So we had these gentoo penguins which were porpoising through the water. Because it was a penguin colony right there. But they were just porpoising so close to us and catching krill as they went. And it was almost like they were going to jump into the kayak at one stage.
Wow.
It was so cute. They were just probably about 20 of them just sort of came barreling down towards us and ended up going under the kayak and kept on going the other side. And similarly, we had a Antarctic fur seal come up and check us out at point blank range as well, which was awesome. Really lovely. So from when you're normally up in the big cruise ship, or even when you're on land, I guess you're standing and you're looking down on the penguins, but to be right down on the water level with them was really special. So,
beautiful.
Yeah. So that was one of my highlights, I guess. Another one was, for me, all the polar history. So I've read, I loved reading the book about Ernest Shackleton, his book that he wrote himself called South, which is the account of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition of 1914 to 17. And it's a pretty famous story, but, in case you need a brush up, their ship got locked in pack ice, and they drifted for a whole polar winter through stuck in the ice, and eventually they had to hop off their ship and make camp on the ice, and their ship got crushed. So they had their 3 life rafts, which they sledded and walked across the ice, eventually relaunched them when it got towards summer, and they made it to this island called Elephant Island. And from Elephant Island, Shackleton and 5 others set off in one of the life rafts and travelled 1,300 kilometres across the worst oceans in the world to navigate to South Georgia Island. So, and then they launched a rescue and they rescued all of them. So all 28 men on that part of the expedition survived. But to see so we got to go to Elephant Island on this trip, and it's the most inhospitable, dreadful place that you could imagine spending a winter. And we're looking at it in summer, and it's got this glacier. Where they camped was a little tiny spit of land jutting out between 2 inhospitable bays. There's this enormous glacier coming down, which would have been just chilling them the whole time. And there's just these boulders with penguins and seals around, but in winter those would have become very scarce and they would have had trouble finding food. But they slept under their upturned life rafts for 4.5 months through an Antarctic winter.
You can imagine what's going through people's minds to be able to survive that kind of, especially over 100 years ago, I don't think my mind would be strong enough to deal with that.
Exactly. So it was really, it really gave you goosebumps to look at where those men survived that. And there's a little statue there now, which to me the statue should be Shackleton for his incredible leadership, but it was actually it's a statue of the captain from the ship that brought Shackleton back to rescue them.
Right. Okay.
So that was a pretty amazing experience as well.
So there's another vote for kayaking. That does sound amazing. And it was interesting to hear Carolyn talk about experiencing some of the polar history down there, Ernest Shackleton's expedition and stuff. Coincidentally, later the very same day that I chatted to Carolyn, I interviewed Flip Burns, who is actually the great-granddaughter of one of the other members of Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition, and she told me some of the stories related to him. So we have more to come on this story in a future episode too. There you go, lots of teasers today. In any case, I loved hearing about Carolyn's experiences, and it's just convinced me even more. I don't think I needed convincing, but now I'm 1000% convinced. Anyway, I hope that you have enjoyed hearing these stories about travels to Antarctica. It's not a place that all of us will ever get to, but it's certainly really lovely to hear about. So thank you very much for listening to episode 184. Big thanks to my 3 guests. First up, I chatted with Suzanne Moore. You can find Suzanne at suzannemorewriter.com. And just recently, she's released her first novel. It's called The Place Between, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to that. You can find out more about Paul Pichugin on his website. He's a landscape and travel photographer, and you can find him at paulpichugin.com. And finally, Carolyn Beasley is a travel journalist and has written about all kinds of adventurous and exciting places, and you can find out more about Carolyn's work at carolynbeasley.com. Hop over to the Facebook group and join me there. I want to know who else has been to Antarctica and who else wants to go. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or there's a link in the show notes. For this episode, the show notes are at notaballerina.com/184. And as always, thank you very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.